All right. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to our discussion on modernizing financial operations with secure internal tools. I'm Ayala, a sales engineering leader here at Retool. Joining me is Lawson Bonds, VP of Development and Data Solutions at Arkansas Federal Credit Union. The conversation today will go like this. We'll hear from Lawson about how he's leading digital transformation projects at AFCU, get his top lessons and takeaways for building back office banking tools to drive operational efficiency, and see a live demo of what he's built. We'll save 10 minutes at the end for a live Q&A, so if you have any questions that come up, please post them in the chat's Q&A in the bottom right corner of your screen. The session is being recorded, so you'll get an email with the recording. So first up, Lawson, can you give us context on your role at AFCU and how your team impacts the business there?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Lawson Bonds. I'm the VP of Data and Development Solutions here at Arkansas Federal Credit Union. My role here at AFCU is to implement continuous change and improvement by eliminating manual processes, changing how data is utilized, and modernizing our systems for efficiency and scalability. I lead the business intelligence, data warehouse, programming, and system analyst teams here at AFCU, which touch every aspect of the credit union. Our business intelligence and data warehouse department handles our dashboarding, reports, ELT. Our programming department handles our automation, document intelligent capture platforms, and centralizing logging. And of course, Retool. Finally, the system analyst department manages our member platforms, such as loan origination, document retention, and email signature platforms. So as you can see, we are embedded in the core of our financial institution. This presents several challenges, but a lot of opportunities to influence change within our organization.
Awesome. Thank you for walking through that. What have been your team's biggest priorities?
Since we've got Retool, I would say in 24 to 25, year 24, 25, right, would be our biggest statement would be simple but effective. Sounds easy in theory, as always, but there's a lot of complex processes and the use of technology to streamline them into a few steps while capturing everything needed. We need automation platforms to take place in our data strategy to leverage data to allow our end users to react quickly, reduce manual processes, and perform actions on our systems within a single platform. This is where we're leveraging Retool to be our middleware. Retool allows us to decommission these older, ineffective platforms, connect several systems under one interface, and eliminate these manual processes like Excel. Our end goal is to use APIs and data to create a better user experience for our employees as well as our members.
Great. So for folks who may be unfamiliar, Retool is an application development platform that uses a drag and drop editor, code, and AI to ship operational tools and backend automations in hours instead of weeks. You connect to your databases and APIs, build your UI with over 100 pre-built components like tables and forms, write JavaScript, Python, and SQL to create custom logic, and fit into your SDLC with source control and dev tools like testing and debugging. For financial companies like AFCU, with stringent security and governance requirements, you can self-host Retool, integrate with your SSO provider, and use role-based access controls, audit logs, and more. So, Lawson, what problems were the biggest for you to tackle and why?
I believe with any financial institution, the name of the game is change. How we bank today differs from how we banked 5 to 10 years ago. And in a few years, it's going to change again. This industry is rapidly changing, and is usually banking is not at the forefront. There are a lot of rules and regulations that we must constantly be aware of and apply to our day-to-day operations. Hiring people to manually look at everything to determine if we are compliant is not feasible over time. We must bridge people and technology together. And then from there, use Retool to create effective communications from our vendors and processes to develop these effective solutions. You might ask, what about internal processes that we control? We struggle just like many organizations when it comes to leveraging systems that we already know. For example, I started looking into what we use to present and pass data. Two systems showed up, of course, our business intelligence as well as Microsoft Excel. I remember thinking, surely our reporting platform is passing more data than anything else. Well, it turns out I was wrong. We are utilizing Excel in more processes than I ever expected, which theoretically should somewhat be in a BI platform. So this is where we use Retool to shine for Arkansas Federal as we build our entire BI platform inside of it, which I'll get into later. Then our users can not only view the data, but act on it in the same screen, eliminating all of our manual Excel processes. So leveraging Retool's technology will allow us to create applications to solve numerous manual processes and replace existing systems, making our ROI work more in our favor than buying several systems to solve one solution or one problem.
Got it. And Lawson, I'm curious, what types of things did you find that people were doing in Excel that you would have expected to happen in a BI platform?
So there's a lot of daily reports that we have. So from these daily reports, there's action that's needed. So what they would do is instead of using the BI system, they would say, I can get some of this data from an external system. So they would get it from there, transform it in Excel, and then send that out throughout their division saying, I need action on this. Mm-hmm. So you would think that we would want that to live inside of Retool. And that's the beauty of it, is because we would allow that data. So we would connect directly to that vendor, bring that data in for that daily action, and then not only just allow them to view it, but to take action right there on it.
Right. Yeah. And having actually worked in the BI industry before, I understand that industries, especially in finance, don't want things living in Excel because of various concerns about, security as well as like fidelity of the data. But that with these tools, the BI tools, the inability to actually act on data is a really big drawback and a really common pain point. So I'm curious, what alternative solutions did you use to try to solve these problems, and why didn't they work?
Our approach to solving these challenges took many forms. We've thrown people at them. We've thrown automations that are on a schedule. We've purchased software, as I mentioned, to try to configure it to business needs, but it may not be intended for everything that we needed it for. All of these had their use cases, but they had one thing in common: effectiveness. With people, we had to hire them, train them, and then also get them to think differently. With timed automations, we can't get that instant feel to act on data. We had to wait for a specific time for it to kick off, or send some type of trigger in order to get that. And so finally, purchasing software would solve 60% of our needs, where the other 40% is we're trying to configure the software for something that it was not meant to do, but it solved at the beginning 60% of the ask. So all of these things take significant time from our employees, which they could use their time better serving our members for their experiences.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, how did you eventually find Retool?
So I would say my journey for finding Retool was, I started asking, what does middleware look like? Something that connects systems, vendors, and data. My first thought is, I have a programming department. Can I not dedicate a small team to implement it? Then questions came up, as I said before, as effectiveness. How long would that take? What would it look like? What would it cost to get it? How long would it take it to get off the ground? How dynamic would it be? How would users interact with it? All of these things in this nature. I started researching alternatives around that, and it all came to one thing: time. How long would it take me to get something to production? And that's when I began looking at no-code solutions. So no code solutions, I could potentially put a system analyst or a programmer on these projects to move several items forward simultaneously. But there was one problem. I needed more functionality that kind of came out of the box. This is where I found, Retool, or where I found a low code solution. I started researching low code solutions and what vendors could meet my needs. I demoed several different vendors, and being hands-on with this, it was an easy choice for the front runner, which was Retool. I looked into several factors, which is, for, as we mentioned, hosted, difficulty, time it took things to move to production, effectiveness, and versatility. Retool met all of my needs based on their functionality and allowed me to customize my product even further with that leveraging code as mentioned above. So that's kind of how my journey led is we use JavaScript, Python, and SQL, as well as our API connections to bring these things together.
Got it. Yeah. And I can imagine that maybe with the no code solutions you looked at prior to Retool, the engineers and developers on your team felt like they didn't even get to leverage the skill sets they have and love to customize what's needed. I guess following up on that, when you talked about like the no code solutions, you looked at first not having all of the functionality you needed. Do you have some examples?
Yes. So we would run into pieces where we didn't necessarily maybe like the workflow or how we would want to transition. Or the other thing would be we had to take 15 hoops to get one thing done, when I could easily just go over there and say, run this JavaScript to compile this data or do some type of action set to do this. Within the others, with the no code solution, it was I have to do 15 steps to do one, then I might have to do 10 steps to do another. So it was time at the end of the day as well, and it's not effective.
Right. And while those tools might be appealing to people without any kind of like data or programming background, for people on your team, you just wanted to make things more efficient, but not, I guess, too simple at the expense of functionality and power.
As well as customizing things. So we can change how things look inside of Retool using that JavaScript, which we were in the template based of a no code solution. We can't change a lot of things, which in Retool, it allowed us to do that, as well as expand further out, which a no code solution doesn't necessarily like you to expand outside their platform. You guys encourage it with yours.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, how did Retool help you remain secure and compliant? Obviously being super important for AFCU, and how did you deploy Retool?
In my industry, the one thing in the back of all our minds is security. We have highly sought after data that can be profitable to people intending to do financial harm. This is where hosting came into play. Can I put this software behind my firewall where I can account for its security and reliability? Would we be in a shared instance along with other companies, and what risk would that entail if we were in the cloud? The answer is you could use their secure cloud, or we could host our own software or their software on our infrastructure, which satisfies our risk acceptance, or actually lowers our risk acceptance. So as a financial institution, when we host this type of software, our infrastructure gives us better peace of mind. So our next question would be, how do we deploy it? And what is the effort to get started? Retool's team made it super easy from our standpoint to get recommended specs for downloading, configuring it in record time. We decided that although Retool supported several different environments as well, development, testing, production in one instance, we wanted to split them out. Therefore, we have a dedicated development and a dedicated production instance.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And for those of you who might be curious, there's a lot of different ways that you could configure, different environments in Retool, whether you wanted to have multiple instances, configure different resource environments for your various data sources, or even have isolated organizations, which we call spaces, within a single instance. So just one more question before you dive into your demo, Lawson. Thus far, how has Retool helped you solve all of the problems that you've discussed?
Retool has allowed us to connect people and data, right? And use that connection to improve processes beyond my first intention. It enables our organization to pivot away from these manual processes or processes that must be completed in several systems. We can now do all that in one screen in one location to create a better experience for our members and employees. We can connect our core banking system to our data warehouse, to our compliance software, all the way down to our hot and cold storage. This would have been a significant undertaking for my programming team to deliver on time, and still the problem is scalability, maintenance, and dynamics. As we are implementing Retool, our replacement for our BI software, we can improve our entire process by connecting all systems, everything under one roof, and make actionable reporting instead of just viewing the data and logging into several systems to complete the ask.
Great. With that said, I'd love you to show us a demo of what you've built in Retool now.
Absolutely.
And while he's bringing this up, again, please feel free to post any questions in the chat, and we have time at the end to go through them.
So to give you some backstory on this, we have a lot of financial data compromising that could be in our Retool app. So I've decided today to go off of our referrals app, which I'm allowed to share for member compliant information. So you should see my screen coming through.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Awesome. So this is our development environment. So I'm going to kind of give you a walkthrough real quick of how we implemented Retool within our system. So first, over here on the left-hand side, you will see that we have our navigation. So the way we are building our navigation is actually based off permissions. So you will only see the apps that we produce in Retool if you have access to them. Now, I've limited my user for this demo, but as you can see, if you look down here in these applications, you will see that this is what I have access to at this point. So any of our end users, when we start to grant them access to apps, they will automatically, dynamically populate over here in this sidebar for them. So for today, the referrals app is something that I would like to go over and kind of what we used to build this app. So the overall ask is that we have members that come in, ask about financial products, and then we need to be able to refer them if somebody at that location does not have the expertise or if they need to get more in-depth information. So how do we record that? So what would happen is the member at the branch would talk to one of our employees. Our employees would log into this platform and say, hey, I'm interested in a product. So they would come over here to say, I need a new referral. So I'm going to click on this. So when I click on this, we have a screen that pops up. Here is we have a member lookup side on the right-hand side, as well as you can enter information. So here, if you look on the left-hand side, you could populate a member name, number, and email manually, but that is not the intent. The intent is to actually connect to our financial core, and we use the searching algorithm in order to do this. We have a user called Joe Automation. So even though I'm not putting automation in the last name, we are hitting our financial core to go and look up this member. When we go look up this member, as you can see, we don't have a member number and email, which would be information that we don't want to display here, but we can select that member for Joe Automation. This populates this first half and allows us to make sure that our data is accurate across our platforms. And then from here, right, we would be able to give them options. Let's say they want a business, let's go with the certificate. And then at that point, we have where our location is. We can put a test comment in here. I'm going to assign it to myself so that way we don't send an email to someone else. And then at that point, we would submit. At this point, we have our loading screen that we pop up, and then it is there. As you can see, our table automatically updates for our end user here. So our end user is able to actually see it real time. They can also click on this, and we will pop up a side modal here to give them more of a reference and more detailed information. That way, we don't populate our initial screen with a lot of information that may not be needed. So over here, they can create new comments. If I need to have a new comment, I can say update. We would be able to do that. We have linked this into our Active Directory, so that way pictures, profiles, and names come over. I can reassign and things of that nature. So the next piece would be, okay, now my employee has sent a referral to a department. Well, someone needs to manage these referrals. So we use tabs across the board. I have full access, but not everybody. We limit these tabs based off of your access. So as you can see here, we've got a lot of demo data in here, but this top one is the one we just put in. So let's say we just sent this to our department that handles certificates. It would come in their queue. They would be able to click this information and pop up. They can see the comments that were made here from our other employee at the branch. They will be able to take action here as well. So we can accept, decline, and I believe contacted. So here's another great thing about Retool, right? So a lot of things we would say, okay, let's say I accepted. Well, we popped up this account number and funds type here at the bottom based on our selection. So here, right, I'm just going to type in a 1234 and then type in its existing or new money. So now I'm coming to here and I say update referral. What happens here is it knows, hey, go look at this account number and see if this exists, because accepted status means this account number exists in our core. And it comes back and says, this is not a valid account number for a member. So we are able to stop and check in the process as to make sure that our data quality is under control. So that is how we would manage them. And then the last piece is, okay, how do I look at the data? If I'm a branch manager or I am a VP of retail, how do I look at all of these referrals coming in to the organization? We built a third tab here, which is the summary dashboard. This gets the referrals by status as well as by location, type, and time. So what I'm trying to do as well is use these data as this dashboard as high-level overview, but we still want to be able to produce raw data to our end users. So you can click on these and actually bring up this raw data. Now, there is an arrow here, which I'll show here in a minute, but this will be able to expand further to show you more detailed information. So what that does is it allows our managers and above to look at what's happening in our organization, but if they get more curious, they can go into more of a detailed level. As you can see in our testing environment, we have most of our testers are at the Cantrell West Little Rock branch. But as you can see, some of them as they go through, this is kind of how a dashboard would look. Mm-hmm. Further along, we do by type, right? So as you see above, right, we have our accepted status. These are what we would call our statuses of a referral. But then we have the locations. But I also want to know what type of referrals. As you saw earlier, I use certificate. So we are using pie charts here to present this data to show what this looks like. We can also look into what these, so if I look at business certificates, we can bring in that detailed data as we did in that other screen, which I'll go into in just 1 minute. We also come over here and say types over time. So as you can see, in January, we did a lot of referrals, but then we didn't really have any. And then February, they really went off for all of these products. So that means if this was not a testing environment from a management standpoint, I'd be able to look at this data and say, what happened in the last half of January for no referrals? So it gives that information at a high level as well to those managers or above. We also thought that, hey, we want to see who our top referrers are in this. And so as you can see here, I'm the last one, congrats. But you can also look at what I've done. So you can see that I have 3 referrals in this time frame up above, as well as my average response time. But look, I'm number 1. It's because I can change it immediately. And so you can also do the exact same thing, is bringing that detailed data in. And so what that looks like from a day, I'm going to change my time frame up here, because you can do the same thing from, I clicked the wrong button. You can do the same thing here. If you're like, hey, I want specifics, let me go to the Cantrell branch. Here we go. So we make it and it actually changes. So now that we want to choose a location, we actually change the referrals, and now it's location, but it's people. So we're actually looking at more in depth. So we're changing our dashboard based on our selections as well. And then you could also do it by status, which is at the very top as well. But let's say I'm going to go back to all. I will change my date to today, because that's the one I just referred to. And I'll look at this one. So from here, this is that Joe automation. And right here, you can see that we populate more detailed information below. So that's kind of how we're using that, is we get that raw data if you need to see it. But if you don't need to see it, then at that point, you don't have to. So I would say that is mostly how we are utilizing the tool today for this retail referrals app.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lawson. There are actually quite a few questions in the chat about the app, so I think we might want to go back there at the end. But I actually had one question. I'm not sure exactly what screen it was on, but you were talking about data validation and how when someone enters an account number, it checks if that's a real one. And I think that's really interesting, especially given, the scope of this conversation being around like financial tooling. And I'm kind of just curious how you've set up data validation and the like in Retool. And the reason I'm asking is, we do have a lot of out of the box sort of like different validation types for various components, but you can also, of course, like write JavaScript to check against various data sources for records, et cetera. So just curious how you've gone about that.
So we use both. So in Retool, we limit people on the workflow as well as through data validation. And then on the second half, right, where we really need to go and reach out to that financial or that core data, we use APIs or SQL in order to go grab that validation and bring that back based on the information inputted in that screen. So we use a bit of both in our Retool instance.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Couple more questions. So having shown all of this, which is fantastic, thank you so much. I'm curious what the feedback has been like about Retool at AFCU so far.
I mean, that's a great question. When I first brought up the idea of trying to implement Retool with my peers, they didn't really understand how a bank could leverage a tool like Retool. How could we build one screen and put on all the top of these systems to create more efficient processes? How do we connect these systems under one roof? Would it take years to get a solution up like this and running? All of these are good questions that I had to first ask myself. How would this work? The easiest to get buy-in from my standpoint for the business users is to produce a proof of concept. This is where I started. It was very straightforward process from Retool to get a local instance running on my computer, and their solutions engineering team is phenomenal. I ran several iterations using different use cases, and their team always helped me out with any questions or ideas that I had. They showed me best practices, which I had to redo some things after they corrected me. They allowed me to use reusable code and allowed me to produce several proofs of concepts to present to my peers. Once presented, my peers could understand the power of a platform like Retool and began going through the exercise of what all could a tool like this replace, create efficiencies. And then today, we have 30 plus projects in the pipeline already requesting to use Retool. That is on top of my BI transformation that will be completed this year. So our organization is super excited about what a tool like this brings to the table and allowing us to keep up with constant change.
Awesome. And that's really exciting. And I think that's something we really commonly see, right? Where people might come to Retool for a specific use case or a specific team, and then through trying out the platform and starting to use it, realize there are tons of other use cases, teams, different parts of the stack you can bring into Retool. So kind of in line with that, I'm curious, what tools are you planning on either sunsetting or reducing usage of due to retool?
We would ideally like to replace several things straight up with Retool. That would include the BI platform, our organizationing ticketing system, our intranet, Excel processes, as mentioned before, and automations on a timer to allow us to move more toward that instant automation and real-time validations. Although some of these systems are pretty extensive to replace, we are projecting to decommission roughly $43,000 worth of systems by the end of the year. One of these platforms will be our SAP BI reporting tool. Today, we struggle with poor customer service, performance, and overall the process of building a report. Creating reports should be a simplistic process. Where the challenge should come in is visualization by providing information to all levels to complete the ask, as you saw in the demo. This is where we use Plotly inside of Retool as well. So Plotly allows us to expand graphs outside of the standard bar and pie charts, expanding our end users' ability to interact with data. We're also moving away from our BI developers creating reports and transitioning to about 80% of self-service reporting, where we will use Retool to develop a series of interfaces to allow the end users to pull data requests on their own. They will be able to save, modify the reports, and when their dashboards or more complex things are needed, our BI team will then step in. This creates actionable reporting as well. Our end users not only able to see the reports, but able to complete the ask, but also allow integrations as well to extend Retool through APIs. This allows information to be entered in one location, as I said earlier, and replicated to several systems, which is a huge win for our organization, allowing us to be better serving our members and as well a better experience as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I have a couple of follow-up questions. So when you talk about the kind of self-serve reporting you're trying to empower folks with, replacing your BI tool with Retool, what are those teams? Like, I'm curious what types of workflows they're trying to do within a self-serve reporting tool.
So, I mean, the teams that are using the data, you're saying from like the end user perspective?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, our business users, they have a lot of questions that are sometimes simplistic, right? I mean, for example, how many members have this flag on their account that we need to contact them today, or fraud related questions. So from an interface, we would allow them to be able to pull that data, but also save that data. But then on top of that, let's say you created that. Today, what has to happen is if I have a request, and let's say I use my previous example of a flag, and I need to add a new flag to that report, they have to raise a ticket. Our BI team has to get that ticket, work that ticket, push that to production, and then allow the end users. With Retool and the self-service, they would go edit, add new flag here, bring it in, boom, end of the story. So a 5-minute process when it potentially could take hours or days, depending on workload of another department. So it allows them to change instantly for those interfaces to get the data that's needed. We'll also bring back sample data as well. So obviously with self-service reporting, you want to be able to limit some of this stuff. You don't want to say, go get me 10 million points of data and bring it back in. So we'll use sample data at that point. Is this what you're looking for? And if they say yes, we'll start narrowing down so that way we can bring the sample set to the end user without having to say, okay, now you wanted 10 million records. Let's go out and try to capture all this data and bring it back, which could take time. Instead of we say, hey, these are 100 records of the sample data that you're requesting. Is this in line with what you're wanting? And then they say yes. So that also saves time when it comes to a self-service reporting.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So it seems like a lot of the end users of this would be folks who are really like interacting with your customers and members every day and just being able to provide a much better experience. I think you talked a little bit about like what would come next in terms of the member site. I don't know if that's too nascent to kind of have a vision for, but I'm curious if you've thought about that at all and other ways that you could potentially use Retool to really improve the member experience.
Yeah, for sure. So there are times we want to run campaigns. Like, for example, we allow our members to, toward the end of the year, toward Christmas, sometimes funds get tight. So we allow members to, skip a payment maybe on their car loan or their mortgage or something of that nature. So those things like that change every year.
Right.
We could easily utilize Retool instead of having to create. It's not feasible for us to go into the SDK of our online banking platform and start creating these screens for one specific use case, when we could just display Retool inside of our online banking that says, oh, you need to do this, but then make a dynamic change. Oh, now we need to transition from skipping a loans to, oh, you need an added service or something of that nature. We can capture that data without having to go through a 6-month process of the SDK version and the route of that. So it allows us to build that and move that to production a lot quicker. And for our members as well, is we can act more quickly, allowing that member experience to be better.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's really exciting to hear. More and more we're seeing customers use Retool actually as part of their external or customer facing products, whether as the entire thing or, to your point, just sort of additional features and things where the investment to build that from scratch relative to perhaps how long it would stay the same doesn't really make sense.
Yep.
Yeah. And one more question for you before we dive into the audience Q&A. What advice do you have for other engineering leaders at banks as they look to modernize their tech stack?
I mean, embrace change. Modernizing the banking industry is a very complex and has challenges that we must overcome. One of those is, how do we connect all of your systems across your infrastructure? What processes will be effective? Most importantly, does your organization accept change? So all of these questions come into your mind when you're talking about something like that. So also, most importantly, does your organization accept change? It may not be going with solutions that are standard yet. Arkansas Federal broke it down into several areas of what we do and how do we utilize those systems today, understand the organization, where are we trying to go in the next 5 to 10 years. We're also going API first approach, embracing automation, continuous integration, and deployment. Finally, of course, user experiences. This needs to be heavily focused on in today's world, as we are a mobile first world.
Got it. Yeah. I lied because I do have one follow-up question based on what you just said. When you talk about user experience, how did you ensure that the things you and your team were building were going to be exactly what these end user teams needed?
So it takes, when it comes to this, it's a new, different technology for us. When we said low code solution, right, and moving this to production. So for us, our first stab at it is, well, we'll try to do it ourselves, right? Programmers are usually not the best designers, right? And so we have a team that actually does our front end interface, and they specialize in that. And so even though today, for example, with our BI platform, our interface will look nothing and interact nothing like it does today. It's all about workflow, efficiency, processes, and how to get from A to B quickly, but not miss any of the data or systems needed to do that. So that's kind of how we took that approach. It took us a few iterations as well, because you're getting used to the tool. So as said, I started off with the demo, and I kind of did it myself with my own instance of Retool. And then I connected with your engineering team, which were like, hey, you need to do this because this would be your ask. So they actually asked me, what are you looking for and where are you trying to take a tool like Retool? And then guided me to that solution, because the first few iterations of the sidebar piece, we were putting that on every screen. And they were like, no, you need to use a reusable code, use the modals in order to do that. And so that allows us to make templates based off of that, so we can quickly go forward with all our apps and not having to worry about it. Because as well as if you put that sidebar on every app that you ever did and you ever need to change it, you have to go back and touch every app that has ever existed. Instead of using that reusable code functionality that you guys have, we only have to make that change once and it affects everything throughout our platform.
Right. Yeah. And for the audience, what he's referring to is we have what we call modules in Retool, where you can reuse groupings of components across various apps. We similarly have a query library for reusing code. And I think you raise a couple really interesting points, right? One is that there's always going to be iteration and feedback loops between what you and your team are building and what the end users need. But with Retool, given kind of a lot of the abstractions, that feedback loop can be much tighter and quicker. You also mentioned that you are not necessarily a designer. I think it's worth noting that we do actually see a lot of front-end engineers and designers using Retool, but also really aim to make it easy to build not just powerful apps, but also really beautiful apps, just via themes and various components, et cetera, that of course can be extended and customized as needed. Well, thank you so much, Lawson. This was really fantastic. And now let's dive into the audience Q&A. The first question I will start with from that was, how much time and man hours did you put into developing the tool you shared in Retool?
So the base layer, I would say we had probably a month because we're trying to make it dynamic, and that's usually one FTE. So we didn't use multiple FTEs because when we're trying to do proof of concept and everything, we want to make sure that we get a standard across. So I'd say one FTE for a month to get the dynamic sidebar built. But from the application side, the one I just showed, it took us less than 2 weeks to go from building it, testing it, deploying it.
Wow, that's really impressive. More on the app itself, there was a question around what the data structure for the permissions you described look like.
So there's several different options. So Retool has a lot of permissions built into their platform. And so you can utilize that. They also have user attributes that you can fill in. So we utilize those types of permissions. But when it comes to other external systems, sometimes we have to reach out to those to make sure we get their authorizations because we can't contain everything inside of Retool. Right. So we use Retool as our base layer. And then when we need external authorizations, maybe for a platform that we're integrating to or sending data to down the pipeline, we make sure those authorizations are correct for that user in order to push forward.
Got it. Yeah, no, makes sense. And just for folks on the call, we have like built-in role-based access controls. You can also map any permission groups from an IDP to Retool and then set permissions not only at, the app layer or tool layer or data layer, but also within your applications themselves. I think there was some commentary on that in the chat, even things like, role level security within the data you display in a table, or showing or hiding a component to update data based on a user group. Another question on the app itself, which was, did the internal tech team build this or was it outsourced? If done internally, how many were devoted to this? I think you spoke to that already, but I guess, maybe a follow-up question there is, prior to discovering Retool, was there ever a world where you considered outsourcing everything or outsourcing part of your work just because of the need to focus your team more on, value activities for your members?
I think it depends on the situation. So when it comes to, for us, outsourcing, it makes sense. And the situation is some people might be more experts. And so sometimes the services that professional services that teams offer are actually more of a benefit to us than us trying to go in there and create it ourselves. The other half, to answer your original question, is our internal team did build this. It took one FTE, 2 weeks. Well, I would say it actually took about 1.5 because I have to include the testers in there as well as the business analyst. So I would say about 1.5 for about 2 weeks is what it took to turn around this platform.
Great. Okay.
Or the app, not the platform.
Right. Another question from Andreas. We're currently using Retool for customer support. Was curious if you use Retool for customer support and how that experience has been. Just to make sure I understand the question, are you referring to like for the customer support team, Andreas? Like your customer support team? Awesome. Okay. Yes.
So for our internal customer support or customer, like our member or
Yeah.
our member support?
I think either. So just to add a little color,
I'll,
like,
I'll go through both then, right?
yeah.
So so what we were doing from internal, right, from customer facing customer support, we're actually leveraging like Teams and things of that nature. So that way, if there's something that needs to happen in an app or your action and things of that nature, we can actually ping people in our organization live and instead of having to send an email or something. So that instantaneous piece is there. And then the other piece to customer support from a banking industry is data, right? Is this member is usually calling in to ask a question. How do we connect them to the right thing? And so it's navigation using Retool at that point as well. And then from external members, right, that would be, as mentioned earlier, right, when we want to go through and say, hey, we need to release this type of solution to a member quickly or change it dynamically on the fly. That's how we interact with our members. From a member support, that still today goes through our online banking platform, but we are looking to potentially move that also into Retool.
Awesome. Yeah. And just to add additional color, our customer support team at Retool actually uses Retool extensively, whether it is using various tools and applications we've built to, properly triage and respond to tickets, or back-end automations we use to categorize like the severity of various, incoming reports.
Absolutely. As well as, on our road list or on our roadmap is to actually change our internal ticketing system to Retool. And so that is something that we feel like, hey, this makes sense to live in this tool. And so then also you can connect that data a little easier as well. But it also allows our screens to be what we need. With our customer ticketing today, we're in this template based. We don't like the reporting necessarily, or we're really in this box, and Retool allows us to get outside that box. That's why we will transition away from our ticketing system to Retool.
And there was a really quick follow-up question I just saw in the chat, which is, what are you currently using for ticketing, and which parts would you replace?
I'm going to replace. So today we use SolarWinds. And so today that piece is our asset management and our ticketing system. We will replace both with Retool.
Awesome. Okay. There was another question from Andreas, which was you're self-hosting, as you mentioned. So I was curious to hear about your development and deployment lifecycle and how you've approached authentication.
So the way we have it today, we have a development environment and then we have a production environment. We use Team Foundation or Azure DevOps in order for our repository. So the way our workflow today is we build the app inside of our inside of our development instance. It goes through a various testing cycle as well inside that development instance. And then at that point, we push it to production through our pipelines inside of Azure DevOps. So there is no, editing in production. It's when we push it straight from testing to that production. It's a flawless push. So we don't have to do anything, configure anything or anything of that nature. It moves everything for us in our pipelines.
Yeah. And in terms of the users accessing your production instance, you are integrating Retool with like an SSO provider ID in terms of authentication, correct?
Yes, we are integrated with Active Directory, as well as some of the other stuff that comes down is for some of our admin functions, we actually have our two-factor as well. So Duo is also built in to this. So that way, if we're like, hey, we need to make sure that this screen is accessed by the right people because of security reasons, we have SSO layer, and then on top of that, our two-factor authentication.
Got it. All right. A question that I think is more for me from Steve, which is there a way to integrate Retool with Windows file shares? I would like to build a dashboard for a user where they can upload a file, and in the background, it'll move it to a specific file share for further processing with other programs like Intap Integrate Builder. If not, is it on the roadmap, and what's the ETA estimate? Steve, please feel free to email me after this. I'll share my email address at the end if I want to check offline, but I don't believe we have an out-of-the-box connection with Windows file shares. That being said, anything that we could connect to via like a REST, GraphQL, or gRPC API, we should be able to not only, read from or pull files from, but also write back to or share files with. So if Windows File Share has any sort of API, that is definitely possible today. But again, please feel free to reach out to me and can get into more detail.
I think it's also to note about the workflows inside of Retool allows you to do that process potentially as well. So you could potentially utilize workflows inside of Retool to meet that ask.
That is a really, really good point. Yeah. So for those of you who might not be aware, workflows is basically our back-end automation layer or product where you can set up jobs either on like a cron schedule or webhook based to just run back-end business processes like ETL or reporting, like threshold-based reporting, for example. Okay, a question from Andre. We are exploring solutions for building UIs for the company back office operations, managing clients, financial transactions, data exchange with various third parties, very similar to what you demoed, Lawson. What are the best practices for doing this with Retool? And could you share any advice and maybe some gotchas to what watch out for when starting such a project? And again, Andre, also please feel free to email me to connect you with folks at Retool, but Lawson would love to hear your perspective on that.
For sure. I think with anything, right, it's your preparation before you start. So making sure your business analyst teams or your requirements are really captured the right way and going through that process to kind of get an extensive, because sometimes they do change when you're inside of it to reflect. But for us, right, we're using that API approach, right? So it's how do we go and grab these other systems and their information to bring into Retool in order to do that. But on top of that, I think it's the ease of use for us. And so I would say the gotchas that for me is I had to rebuild my interfaces a few different times because I kept finding a better approach, right? So I would build an interface that met the ask, but then I would go, this actually now I would like to do this. And so it's that kind of continuous deployment that we use going forward. And so I would say that might be my biggest gotcha is that, it's not necessarily a negative. It's you're continuously improving on something that you already did. But we utilize JavaScript and, like I said, APIs and SQL to do a lot of that stuff to kind of bring in all that information.
Great. Thank you. We have two other questions, and I think we probably have time for both of them. From James, what was your organization's approved tech stack that you replaced with Retool? I know you mentioned SAP for BI, but if there's anything else you can touch on there.
So we're heavy on, SAP for BI. We're going to get rid of SolarWinds as well. We have Smartsheet for its as well for kind of like our online piece. And then we have a lot of back-end automations. So it's really where our programming team is created these interfaces using .NET and taking that and going forward. We will be replacing all of those going forward with Retool because .NET programming takes a minute to start concept, get it, push it, go forward, when I could easily just do that in Retool. So we will be placing a lot of our heavy end back office stuff, applications of that nature.
Great. And then the last question from Sandre, do you use Retool for any development tasks? For example, managing test environments?
Not today. There's a lot of use cases for that. That we could do today, but not at this point. I think that's a great way to look at something in order to use Retool, but today we do not.
Yeah, and offhand, I can't remember which customer of ours it is, but folks definitely use Retool to do stuff like that. I know of a customer that does it to actually like provision and deep provision also like their infrastructure, right? So various like VMs and upsizing them, et cetera. So lots of kind of more DevOps or CI/CD management use cases as well. Great. So thank you everyone so much for all of the questions and for joining us, and really a special thank you to Lawson for everything you shared today. Everyone here should receive an email with a recording to the session. And please do feel free to reach out to me with any questions at all. My email is ayala@retool.com. Nate shared it in the chat. If you'd like to explore how Retool can help you build secure internal tools for your financial operations, you can get a demo with us at retool.com/demo. You can also get started and try out Retool for free by creating an account at retool.com. But we're going to wrap it here and see you all next time.